Hey everyone, welcome to Reflections, the Wisdom of Edgar Cayce. We're coming to you as always courtesy of our broadcasting partner, moretalk.tv. And we've reached that time of year again when we take some time to reflect back on a few of my favorite guest interviews from the year of 2014. 2014 for me was a challenging one, full of lessons to be learned and karmic patterns to be brought to the surface and overcome. This pattern of clearing that I truly believe was the overall theme of the past year, as we've seen so many changes taking place on both a personal and a planetary scale. Hope everyone was able to grow from the challenges and adversity faced over this past year, embracing the increased opportunities to make a change and follow new paths on our journey. As we celebrate the end of another year, we are gifted with the season of Thanksgiving and, of course, the celebration of Christmas. As we embrace the opportunity to spend time with our loved ones who light up our lives, I want to take this opportunity to summarize some of the beautiful messages that came through the Cayce readings on the intensely loving and empowering celebration of Christmas and the Christ consciousness. In coming together this holiday season, we must all consider in our hearts what it means to truly love and support each other on our unique path. We are all encouraged to keep in mind the purpose for which the Christ came into the earth. Christ's purpose in incarnating was as a way shower, so that all of us may have a compassionate, forgiving example of how best to cultivate the awareness and understanding of God manifest in our world. Cayce continually encouraged us in the readings to remain mindful of this everlasting presence within all of us, that divine spark that we may strive to better ourselves and all those around us through loving kindness, patience, compassion, and of course the act of service to all those in need. We are reminded that Christ promised to be with us always, even unto the end of the world. And in the words of Cayce, though there may be abroad hate, avarice, selfishness, and those things that make men afraid, be still within your own heart, within your own consciousness, and know that He is with you always. As we give, so shall we receive. This to me is the true spirit of Christmas. As we look around and witness the struggle for power going on among societies, religions, nations, and corporations, we are reminded that the real strength lies in the small, still voice within us all. Remembering this will carry us through these difficult times and give us infinite hope for the future of mankind. As our material world, that we have become so accustomed to, continues to be shaken up and forced to reshape itself before our very eyes, we are always encouraged to focus on our spiritual lives, the world of our soul's creating. This is a world that no one can destroy but ourselves, a world of infinite possibilities. As Cayce said, mind is ever the builder, the architect of our choosing. Thoughts are as real as any material things. This is a universal law that encourages us to be relentlessly mindful every moment of every day. Fear not what's going on in the world around us, but rather be mindful of what you are creating inside of yourself every day as you generate tens of thousands of thoughts from sunup to sundown. Have faith in the way shown to us by the Christ, and remember to love one another as you love yourself. Heaven is not a destination to be reached. It's a state of being achieved by starting exactly where you are. Knowing this, we celebrate together this year the path shown to us by Christ and, of course, all the great teachers who have incarnated here on earth, so that we may remember that the kingdom of heaven truly lies within, and it's always waiting for us to check in. Let's now take the time to enjoy some of my favorite guest interviews of 2014. I hope everyone has a love-filled, beautiful holiday season from all of us here at moretalk.tv and Edgar Cayce's Association for Research and Enlightenment. Please enjoy. Dr. Christine Page, thank you so much for joining us on the show today.
Thank you for inviting me. It's lovely to be talking with you today.
Absolutely, my pleasure. And I know you have talked extensively about the mind-body connection and how it relates to health, which this is kind of a hallmark of the Edgar Cayce readings. But I'm curious personally, how did you first get introduced to the Edgar Cayce readings in the a.r.e?
Well, I was brought up in London, as you can hear from my accent, and I was brought up with some of the the colleges of psychic studies, of spiritual association. And so Edgar Cayce certainly was introduced to me from a very early age. And I admired the work that, and the fountain of work, the amount of work that was available, the teachings. And as I went on into medicine myself and then complementary medicine, I obviously became very interested in what he had said about certain conditions and what treatments, especially those treatments, of course, that were more natural to what I was being offered as a doctor. So I knew about Edgar Cayce very early on, and then had the privilege of going to some of the conferences that were run by the a.r.e. Back in the 80s. And then really I said, yes, I've come home. So it's very important to me, and I'm looking forward to being back in Virginia Beach again.
Great. Well, we're looking forward to having you back in Virginia Beach. And I know as a doctor, you have started looking more deeply into the causative factors of disease. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, as a doctor of now 35 years, I was, of course, thinking that when I came out of medical school, I had all the answers. I thought everybody had taught me everything, but very little had anything to do with the spirit or even the emotions of an individual. And it was that there was something chemically wrong, or something had happened within the physical element of the body that had actually caused the illness. And I went into general practice after a while, and which allowed me to see people who had a variety of illnesses. And I recognized that there were similarities to the personality of a certain illness, which I wouldn't have got to if I had seen the same illness over and over again. So I would see someone with backache, and I would hear them talk about, well, I don't feel supported, and people let me
Mm.
down. And then I would hear someone with heart disease, and they would say, oh, I feel stuck, and but I have to keep working because I've got a pension, I've got children to look after. And I thought, wow, there's real similarities between personality types, and especially the emotional friction that was being caused by certain circumstances to that personality type and the illness. And that's really what I started to collate, was the mind body connection. And I put that into my first book, Frontiers of Health. I wrote down as many illnesses as I could and related them to the what was going on in the personality. But at the same time, I also saw there was a connection between each chakra, and I was introduced to chakras at a very early age. And I saw that, let's say, the throat chakra was related to self expression, and that when someone had problems in their throat or their lungs, they often were unable to express something. So I also saw that there was a spiritual component about what was this soul trying to say? What was going on a deeper level when someone had a problem around their throat? So really, I started and continue to build my own dictionary or encyclopedia of work around this mind, body, spirit connection. And of course, use people like Edgar Cayce to say, here's a similarity, or here's some learning that I can integrate into my work to bring it into more wholeness.
Right. Wow, that's wonderful. And what would you say is one of the contributing reasons as to why people are not really in tune with the mind body connection, or how their chakras can be influencing their health?
Um, when I wrote the book Frontiers of Health 20 odd years ago, I thought that by now, we're here in the 2014, everybody would be thinking about this. In fact, I think we've gone in the opposite direction. Part of that is due to technology, that really people rely so much on technology to give the answers. When I was a medical student, we had to make the diagnosis. It was 65% was by listening to the patient. It was about 15% was by feeling and touching the patient, examining them, and only 10% was tests. Now it's completely the other way around. Nobody listens,
Right.
nobody touches, and it's like 95% tests and 5% of the rest. And
Right.
that's as much, my own country of England as it is here, that people will say the first person they speak to is the radiologist, who says, take some clothes off so we can take an x-ray or do an
Right.
MRI. And part of that, unfortunately, is defensive medicine, that the doctors have now got so much insurance to defend against the fact they might miss something. But in all honesty, I think it's a disservice both to the patient and to the doctor, because I don't think I missed something when I was a good diagnostician. And that the challenge for me is that doctors aren't trained to be diagnosticians, they're trained to be able to read an x-ray. And there are so many protocols now that if a patient has this, you have to follow this path. It doesn't allow for anything that might be a little bit of an anomaly. And I want to say that people are anomalies. People don't come in with a label saying, I'm having a heart attack.
Right.
Sometimes the pain is in their jaw, sometimes it's in their stomach. And I feel that we're missing out. So tests are done because we don't allow for the unusual. So you almost have to scan everything to make sure you don't miss anything. And just
Right.
finally, I want to say is that patients are demanding that they want a pill for everything that happens to them. And they're being shown on television where there is a pill for everything and you never have to suffer. So that the patient is being told, you just have to take this tablet and you don't have to consider that there might be a deeper reasoning behind this illness. And so, unfortunately, we have patients come into hospital very quickly. They quickly have a treatment or something, and they're sent out very quickly back in to the same destructive patterning that has caused their illness. But nobody
Right.
tells them that. So, for me, when people used to stay in hospital for much longer periods of time, they got a chance to think about their life. They got a chance to maybe talk to other people and say, well, maybe it's the stress of my life or the way I'm living it that's causing the problem. And maybe the illness is giving me an opportunity to change. But we don't do that. We just say, take this, have this operation, and you just can go back to that same destructive pattern that's causing you the illness in the first place and never change anything at all.
Right. And what does it mean to you to be a homeopath, and how has it kind of influenced you on a personal level?
Yeah, I went into homeopathy because I love the practice. First of all, it has a lot of self discovery, and you have to be a detective to be a good homeopath. And I'm a bit of a detective. I like to really listen to someone, hear what they're saying, see what they're not saying. And I think homeopathy, the skill of homeopathy is to be able to be intuitive to what's not being said, to really get to the focus of what's the source of this person's issue here. And that's why I love homeopathy. The other side of it is it's one of the deepest energetic treatments, so that homeopathy works best when there is less baggage in the way, a less emotional baggage. What we always say is homeopathy works best on children and animals because they've not got all these defenses in place. And what I love about homeopathy, it really shifts people very quickly. And
Right.
even sometimes when they don't want to be shifted, well, they may have some resistance, it will shift them. But
Right.
homeopathy is one of the most holistic of all the practices. And it very much, depending on what dosage we use or potency, we can work with something very physical or something very spiritual. And homeopathy covers that whole field.
Right. And I love the way you talk about illness. And you mentioned that illness is kind of an opportunity, a chance to reflect and find out what could be going on in my life that could be contributing to this physical illness. Can you elaborate a little more about this opportunity of illness?
Absolutely. And that I want, it's not about guilt, it's not about blame. It's like, wow, what a chance this is. I like to see it like a door opening. And it's really saying, wow, here's an opportunity. Do you want to walk through that door? Do you want to change anything in your life? And
Right.
I try to say the illness is no different from maybe getting divorced or being made redundant or even someone dying in your life. These, what we call crises, these times of chaos, are actually opportunities to walk into the mystery of our lives, to change things that we don't like anymore. And I hope that people, when they get divorced, they say, well, maybe I need to change a few things. Otherwise, they just are on their sixth partner and wondering why nothing changes. And it's really ridiculous to say keep doing the same thing if you keep getting divorced. Why would we not say if you're getting sick? Why wouldn't that be a great chance to say, is there anything in my life that's happening, either emotionally or physically, that may be saying maybe if I stop doing that, things would be different? And that's what I see. And what I like to say is, you'll still will get better. It doesn't mean that if you don't listen to the message or you don't take the opportunity, you won't get better. But what I see is that these opportunities, illness is a chance to change your consciousness, to change the way in which you've been living your life, to expand yourself. And why not take that opportunity and run with it?
Christine, what was it like going through medical school, pardon me, and being raised amongst traditional healers and having that background? What was that like for you? Was it difficult, or did it really enrich your experience?
Of course, at the time, you think everybody does this. And I mean, anybody who's listening will understand that I would go and with my mother and listen to maybe someone channeling someone from Egypt. And I would think everybody did that on a Saturday. I thought everybody listened to 5,000-year-old Egyptians. And I would say, well, that man makes sense, you know, and I would often say they made more sense than my teachers did. So, well, hey, whatever. And I think having such open parents, parents who they didn't, they said, you know, take something that you hear into your heart. If it feels good, hold it. If not, let it go. So I think my parents were both into very much inquiring and learning, but without dogma. And I was very fortunate to have that, I realize in retrospect. And so that sort of inquiring mind, that being able to go into different esoteric areas was fantastic for me. I still do it. I love that exploration. And listening to other people's points of view from different perspectives, that's fantastic. My other challenge was that I've always been intuitive, and I always could see people's energy. I didn't understand it as a child, but it was almost like I thought everybody could see different levels of a person's energy field. And
Right.
my problem was that when someone felt sad or when someone felt distressed, I would take that distress on because I didn't have any boundaries. So that when someone was suffering, I suffered. And I thought, why is nobody else noticing this? uh, and later on, I would take on that suffering, and the only way I coped with it was to faint. So I fainted away to get away from it. And
Oh,
in my
wow.
teenage years, I would, you know, put my hands over my eyes and my ears, fingers in my ears, whenever we went to a film or anybody talked about anything where someone was suffering, because I could almost feel myself fainting. And so
Right.
the irony was, of course, that when it came to choosing a career, I kind of went out there and said, now, where shall I go where nobody suffers? Like, become a doctor. Oh, very clever. And of course, I had to learn that I couldn't faint. And I see that as a soul journey that really very quickly my consultants weren't happy with me if I fainted. So I had to learn to develop boundaries. I put my white coat on. I placed some distance between myself and my patient. And I think that it was a tremendous training for me not to take everything on myself. I
Right.
love doing medicine. I love learning about people. I love feeling into what was going on, but I had to not take it on. There came a point in my life when I became so detached that I didn't care about anybody, that I'd put too many boundaries up. And I knew that when that happened, I had to stop my job because I knew that when I didn't care, it wasn't much good doing what I did. And when I actually gave up my practice, I actually allowed my intuition to become stronger. And now I can still feel into people's energies, but not take it on so much. So, you know, that was really the biggest challenge for me, which was learning how to let people have their experience, have their emotions, and not feel responsible for it.
Right. And as each generation seems to be vastly different from the one prior to it, what can we teach our daughters and our granddaughters about honoring their body?
As I said, if we could, first of all, we are the role models. So what they watch, that's how they learn, is watching. So even if we say something, but if we do something different, they're going to be watching more than listening. So
Right.
first of all, I'd say that. I was listening to a program that was talking about naming the parts of the body. And they were saying is actually name it for what it is. Don't give it a pet name. Don't give it a made up name. They said because that actually causes almost more shame of the body than just calling it what it is.
Right.
And they've done a lot of studies in the Netherlands, and the Dutch are much more comfortable with their bodies. And they'd seen that there were far less problems with abuse, etc., than when we actually just call it for what it is and be comfortable with it. So that's what I would do. And I would also say that for a child to see that her body is just perfect as it is, and male or female. Unfortunately, we have so many young people who are wanting, especially young women, for their graduation gift. They want to have their breasts either made bigger or smaller. And, we're not going to change that. That's the theme of today. Just as, there are other things that youngsters are doing to their bodies and saying this makes it more beautiful. And I have to say, I did things in my youth to do that. But I think the more that the parents can show them that they love their body as it is, the better. And I think, many of us, even whatever age you are, we have insecurities around our body. But treating it with love and respect is a really precious thing. And I have to say, for a masculine to respect the feminine body, not call it out or give names to it, or, in a negative way, to tell their wife how beautiful they look. Um, and likewise, just, to give the same compliment back to the masculine. So it's very much, I think I'm saying, is about how you see your parents are with their own bodies, how they treat each other with respect, and whether or not they give compliments. Compliments are so important.
Absolutely.
Because
Couldn't
often
agree
we're
more.
much more aware of the criticism than we are the
Yeah,
compliment.
absolutely. And that was
Yes.
so big with the Edgar Cayce readings, was just to speak a kind word every day and just make a point. That's It's such a small thing, but it sends out such a huge ripple effect of positivity.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'm so saddened, Brent, when I hear people speak about, I say, well, who complimented you, or who gave you praise? And they go, nobody. I think, oh, as you said, just one thing a day doesn't take
Hmm.
much. And it only shows the insecurity in that person that they can't give one piece of praise because they're so lacking it themselves.
Right, absolutely. And in writing your latest book, what is your hope that the readers and the listeners of this show get from your message?
Well, I would like to say that there are so many things that we've been taught that either are not true or have distorted our truth. As I say, for women, I would like you to consider that maybe the first 3 days of your period, or if you're like me, postmenopause, or the first 3 days of the dark moon, are precious times. They're valuable times. They're times where you can both let go of things that you're ready to let go of, everybody else's emotions, times to nurture yourselves, and times to be more inspired, and see these times as, a holiday, a little holiday when you don't cook for anybody and you take time for you rather than something that's negative. And I'm only saying that that sets up a different ritual. So every month you're looking forward to those 3 days rather than seeing them as something that just is bland like the rest of the rest of the month. I'd also say to women to recognize that they are special, that they have a deep connection to the earth, and that for both men and women, 3,000 years ago, we got cut off from what we call the dragon energy in the earth. And so there's a lot of mythology about killing the dragon or killing the serpent. And
Oh,
when
yeah.
that happened, we got cut off from our power. And to me, it was a very, very conscious decision by the patriarchy to say, let's cut them off from the earth. Let's disconnect them from that power of the earth. Because when we do that, we have their power. And many of the problems that we see around the solar plexus, which is all about self worth and self identity, has come because we got disconnected from the earth. And so we're desperately trying to create power or sense of self from our outer experiences instead of just feeling, oh, well, I know I belong to this earth because that's where I came into when I was born. So I would love to see us all reconnect to the earth in a more powerful and loving way, but not just how we love the earth, but how the earth loves us. And I think
Right.
mankind doesn't understand that when you love the earth in the way that you allow it to embrace you, and you listen to the beauty of the birds around you, or you see the beauty of the plants, that actually the earth comes back and meets you and gives you abundance. So
Right.
I would love to reconnect people to how they are. And in ancient cultures, when a baby was born, they would take the placenta and bury it into the earth. And they would put a tree on top of that placenta. And what they were really doing was planting the baby in the earth and
Right.
saying, this is your new mother. This is who will keep you safe. This is who will feed you. And then when you went through puberty, that you had another tree planted, and then you had the true trees represented the doorway to which you were now going to lead your life. And I just think some of these mythologies or some of these rituals were lost. And I meet so many people, and unfortunately many who are spiritual, who are not connected to the earth. They've never come here. They're
Right.
still wandering around up here. and and we've been told so much about, that heaven is up here or the good things are up here. And I'm telling everybody, the good things are underneath your feet. And that
Right.
the church knows this. That's why I say that the Pope wears a skirt, why priests wear skirts, why judges wear skirts. It's they all know that the power is in the earth. It's not above your head.
Right. Wow. I like that. What a powerful message. Thank you for sharing those practices as well. That's very inspiring.
Good.
And last, I wanted to touch on the conference that you'll be doing in Virginia Beach, and it's entitled Women's Healing from the Inside Out, Merging s- m- body, soul for health, wisdom, and vitality. And can you tell us a little bit about what conference attendees can expect from this conference?
Oh, this is a great conference, and I'm so pleased the a.r.e. had the courage to put it on because it is a women's conference. Uh, we are inviting women to come from all ages. There's certainly no limits to this. But this is really, I want to share on the Friday evening. I'll be giving a talk with some visual imagery, with some exercises. It's a 2 hour period. But I want to show this history that I've been sharing with you today, some of the mythology, some of the things that we know about being a woman, but maybe they've just got a bit distorted. So that will be on the evening. I'm hoping to give that sort of background, that structure to the rest of the time. Then we have some wonderful other speakers coming in to do some practices. On the Saturday, I'm going to be running a 1 day workshop, which will be very much experiential. It's going to be about meeting your ancestors, about meeting your body, about how do we get rid of energy we don't want anymore, about how to connect to our heart again, to the earth again. And this is all going to be fitted into 1 day. And we're going to use music because music allows us to go deeper than if we're thinking. So I'm really asking those of you who will attend, maybe get the thought that you might even be lying on the ground or at least propped up against a wall if you can go there. Because when we're sitting in a chair, our brain tends to be very active. But when we're
Right.
lying on the ground, our brain switches off a little bit, like going to sleep. So come prepared to have some music flow through you, to allow the music to take you to places that maybe weren't taken, you haven't gone to for a while. And at the end of the day, I'm going to be giving you, hopefully at the end, you'll get some rituals that you can use at home, practical advice, and the ability to go home and share this with your girlfriends, with your partner, your men in your life, and with your children and grandchildren, so that we can start a whole new way of being as a woman.
Wow. Wonderful. Dr. Christine Page, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your wisdom. Your message is truly an inspiring one that's so needed at this time. And from this one male, I truly appreciate you sharing all your wisdom about the sacred feminine. It helps me personally, and I hope it helps everyone else out there.
Thank you so much, Brent. It's been such a fantastic thing to be with you. You're a great interviewer. Thank you.
Dr. Christine Page, thank you so much for joining us today on the show. Andrew, thank you so much for joining us on Reflections today.
That's my pleasure.
Absolutely. And I know you have your latest book out. It's entitled Gobekli Tepe, Genesis of the Gods. And I'm curious, what was the process like writing this book? How did it come about?
Well, the area of study, which basically revolves around southeast Turkey, is something which has been something I've been interested in for the last 25 years. It's an area which I've been looking at very closely relating to the origins of civilization. It's the place that is considered to be the cradle of civilization. It's also where the Neolithic revolution began, the revolution in in architecture, yeah, but also more importantly in agriculture and animal husbandry, and the whole changing of the lifestyle from the hunter-gatherer to the more permanent sedentary lifestyle, which took place sometime a little after 9000 BC. And what I'd always said in books like From the Ashes of Angels and Gods of Eden is that there seemed to be some kind of elite behind this great change, one that seemed to involve shamans adorned in feather coats, most obviously that of the vulture, which is the primary symbol of death and rebirth in the early Neolithic world. And that these individuals seem to be remembered very strongly in myth and legend under the name the Watchers of the Book of Enoch, which is a Hebrew text, the oldest versions of which go back to the Dead Sea Scrolls. So they date probably around 200 BC. But also in Mesopotamia, amongst the civilizations of Sumer, Akkad, Babylon, and Assyria, where these very same individuals seem to be referred to under the name Anunnaki. And I felt that the Anunnaki and the Watchers, and obviously their offspring, and what they gave humanity, as the texts tell us, is a memory of the events that took place in southeast Turkey at the time of the Neolithic Revolution. And, you know, I was looking very closely in this area. And then in the year 2000, it was announced the discovery of this place called Göbekli Tepe. And essentially this was this incredible complex of stone circles, the oldest megalithic monuments anywhere in the world. I mean, I often compare them to like our own Stonehenge in England, but multiplied by 20 times at least. And the stones covered in beautiful carvings, reliefs of animals and other creatures of the natural world. And many of them also shaped into abstract human form, and with abstract heads, which are just simply T-shaped terminations. And if you can imagine all of these placed upon a mountaintop in southeast Turkey, at a date which is confirmed through radiocarbon dating evidence and other forms of dating to roughly around 9000 9500 BC, precisely in the time frame that we know the Neolithic Revolution took place. And you realize that this is the smoking gun that we've been looking for, that here is the greatest clues that we will find, not just to the origins of our own civilization, but very likely the evidence of a previous civilization, a lost civilization that once existed somewhere in the ancient world. And the survivors of it ended up in southeast Turkey and kick-started this revolution, this great change that ends up with everything we have today as our own civilization.
Right. That's amazing. And what has the reaction been to your book?
The reaction appears to be very, very positive all round. I mean, it is
Great.
the only real book on Göbekli Tepe that's easily available. I mean, obviously, there are a few others that have come out here and there, you know, been specialist books and whatever, academic things like that. But this is the first popular book on the subject. And, you know, for the first time, people can read not only about the actual architecture, the descriptions of all the different stones and how it was discovered, but also I answer the questions like why it was created, who created it, and what the impact was on myth and legend from that point onwards. And that's the entirety of the book, really. And there's much to go through, and hopefully we can talk about at least some of that in this interview here.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so much to talk about. I want to start with who created it. This is very fascinating to me because it's like you said, it could potentially have roots in a lost civilization that is not discussed. So what did you find about who created Göbekli Tepe?
Well, the first thing I think we've got to say is that almost certainly the people that actually did the construction and the carving and probably the quarrying or whatever were local people. People that were up to this point hunter-gatherers, would have worked in small groups, providing food and well-being for their family and probably an extended social group, probably working no more in 15 to 20 in any particular community. And their lives would have been pretty nomadic. They would have followed the herds around. They would have taken what animals they wanted at particular times of the year, and that was that. And yet suddenly, around 9,500 BC, you have this huge change where not just hundreds, but probably thousands of people got together for the first time, seemingly in human history, and began to supersize their cult buildings, their religious structures, their sacred sanctuaries in a manner which had, in theory, never been seen before. So, although the evidence from the type of carving and the idea of using blocks and stones and things like that was already in existence within the Middle East at this time, at places like Jericho, for instance, which is obviously much further south in the Levant area, it does seem as if there was some kind of impetus, and that impetus seems to have come from a group that arrived in this area, and all the best evidence that I can uncover would suggest that they came from the north, and that they were a group that archaeology refers to as the Swiderians. Now, this might be a term which a lot of viewers may never have come across, but these people were part of a long tradition that goes back at least to about 30,000 years ago, to a high culture that existed mostly in Eastern and Central Europe, and that these people, as early as 30,000 years ago, had everything from agriculture, a well-formed mother goddess cult. It seems like they were the earliest astronomers. It seems like they also had tailored clothing, and they had very specific forms of shamanism focused around key animals associated with the sky. And these included the swan, which is a symbol of the constellation of Cygnus, the celestial bird, the wolf, which seems to be the wolf or the fox, I should say, which are symbols of what's known as the cosmic trickster. This is figure in the sky that can cause catastrophe and change, and you have to be on your guard about. But also, their other most important symbol was the reindeer. This seems to have been a symbol of the universe as a whole, and that would seem to have been seen as some kind of, creator, if you like, in a creator role. I mean, obviously there were other animals and totems and things that were important to them, but they brought all of these ideas with them into southeast Turkey. And this is very important because I think that when they arrived, these people looked completely different to the locals. I think that they were extremely tall. They had elongated heads. They had very long, striking faces that may have almost been described as serpent-like in appearance. They may have been quite pale because they lived in the north, in much colder climates. And there's evidence that they were human hybrids. Now, I don't mean alien hybrids here. I mean that they were an admixture of two different types of humans. One, our own ancestors, Homo sapiens, or anatomically modern humans, but also Neanderthals, our distant cousins, who are often written off as ugly, brutish, ignorant figures who was almost like a cul-de-sac, a wrong turning in humanity. But the more we find out about them, the more we realize that they were just as intelligent as the human beings, the Homo sapiens of their period, and that at the end of their time here on Earth, which probably comes all the way down to about 30,000 years ago, that they may well have passed on a lot of knowledge and information, not just verbally through teachings, but through the fact that they mated with human beings, or Homo sapiens, and created a hybrid culture. And this hybrid culture was extremely advanced because it had all of the survival and rationality of us as human beings, but suddenly into the mix were all of these ideas to do with spirituality and sacredness and the importance of dreams and connections with nature, which had never been there before. And the bringing together of this created a type of hybrid being that was far more in advance than probably other types of communities. And I think that it was some of these people that came into southeast Turkey. The Swiderians certainly were hybrids. There's been anatomical evidence discovered which absolutely shows that this was the case, that they had these long heads. And that the impact of them was remembered for a very long time, many, many thousands of years, until eventually they were described under names like the Watchers of the Book of Enoch, the Anunnaki of Mesopotamian tradition, but also the angels. These are the origins of human angels. You know, I mean, most people have ideas of angels as these angelic beings with wings that flutter down from heaven. But the earliest angels, as described in the religious texts, had no wings whatsoever. In fact, there is evidence that they wore feather coats, just like the shamans of the early Neolithic. So it looks like these people had a massive impact. They brought their astronomy, they brought their ideas. But of course, the big question becomes, how did they convince the local population to chuck in their free lifestyle as hunter-gatherers with, to be honest, no real worries in the world, in theory, other than providing for their families on a day-to-day basis? How did they convince them to change their lifestyle and settle down in this way? And the answer seems to be something which visionary writer Barbara Han Clough referred to as catastrophobia. Now, this is the fear of catastrophe, the fear that some kind of cataclysm is always about to take place. And the reason why this would have been there shortly before the time of Göbekli Tepe is because there had been a major cosmic event around 10,900 BC. And this almost certainly involved a comet which came into the inner solar system, probably passed around the sun, and then broke into thousands of pieces and which was sent on a trajectory straight towards the Earth. And that once they reached the Earth, they created these incredible, nuclear-like explosions, which devastated large parts of the Earth with wildfires, sending up this ash cloud into the upper atmosphere at the same time that some of the remaining ice sheets were vaporized by fragments of this comet, which were also sent up into the upper atmosphere. The sun was blocked out for a period of time. Who knows how long that was? It could have been years. Rain would then have fallen, which would have been a type of acid rain, because it would have included the chemicals from the ash, from the wildfires. And also, what was probably worst of all was the re-triggering of the ice age, which up to that point had been on the receding, that the ice sheets had been going back and the climate had warmed. Suddenly, there was an incredible drop in temperature, which triggered this ice age, which lasted for 1,300 years, right the way through until 9,600 BC. In other words, just before the time of Göbekli Tepe. And the other thing is that ice core samples from Greenland and other evidence tells us that this wasn't an event that took place in one day or 1 month or even 1 year, but that there were repercussions and other events going on possibly for several hundred years afterwards. This was a terrible time to live, and that you can understand how, even by the time that we come to the building of Göbekli Tepe, these people would have still lived in fear that these cataclysms would take place every time a comet appears in the sky, because that would obviously have been the omen, the sign of this, of any coming catastrophe for them. And the one thing that we know is that comets have universally been seen as the tails of canids, supernatural canids associated with the concept of tricksters, most obviously foxes or occasionally wolves. And the most famous wolf in this position is Fenris, the wolf of Norse mythology, which was said to have brought darkness and destruction to the world during the so-called Ragnarok, or doom of the gods. That even, it said, many of the gods themselves were killed during this time. Humanity was brought to its knees with only a few people surviving. This is, written up. This is there, and there are similar accounts all the way across Europe, right the way into Southwest Asia, into the area around Göbekli Tepe. And indeed, we know that this cataclysm affected the area around Göbekli Tepe because there is a thick layer of ash that's been found not only in Europe but in Egypt, parts of Russia, in even as far as Australia. But we know that it was also there in Southwest Asia, within 100 miles or so of Göbekli Tepe, which contains what they call extraterrestrial material, or which seems to suggest that it was the result of some kind of impact with something like a comet, and it's exactly the time frame of the suggested date of this terrible event, which is around 10,900 BC. So it's my belief that these people came into the area of southeast Turkey, these strange looking people, these tall people with these long heads, long faces, very striking in appearance. So having an admixture of both Neanderthal and Homo sapiens, and that they said to the locals, look, we understand you're suffering from this catastrophophobia. We understand that you fear every time a comet appears in the sky, you think something bad's going to happen. We can give you the solution to this if you listen to what we have to say. And that solution involved the construction of large-scale monuments for the first time in human history. And the reason why they were constructed, they virtually acted as stargates, as gateways, linking this world, and particularly the shamans that would have been involved with these processes, with accessing otherworldly environments. Call it the sky world if you want. You could even call it heaven if you wanted. Going into some kind of otherworldly realm and countering the actions of these cosmic tricksters, the sky fox, the sky wolf, or indeed, obviously, any other creature that they felt was responsible for these cataclysms. And if you look into ethnology and the history of shamanism, you'll find that one of the duties of the shaman is to quite literally make sure that the world continues to exist, that nothing does affect it and cause the collapse of the so-called sky pole that holds up the heavens, not only bringing the end of the world, but the end of time itself. And these beliefs continued probably all the way through from the early Neolithic, where they were probably already, quite old. They'd probably been in existence during the much earlier Paleolithic times, and that they continued to exist right the way through until the last couple of 100 years. And who knows, somewhere out there in Siberia, there's probably shamans still doing things like this today. That's why Göbekli Tepe was constructed. There's many more subtleties behind it, which maybe we can come into, to do with the art and the shape of it, looking like a human womb, and the whole concept of the transmigration of the soul. The fact that it would seem as if these enclosures that include these stone circles would seem to have targeted a particular star in the sky. And this was the setting of Deneb, and that's the brightest star in the constellation of Cygnus, the celestial bird, often seen as a swan, but in Southwest Asia it was a vulture. And this was a symbol of the transmigration of the soul from this world into the next and its return back into this world. And it seems as though this is one of the reasons why the shamans would adorn themselves in cloaks of feathers, because they believe that they transform themselves, just like the human soul in death, into that of a bird, so that they could access these other worlds. And it would seem as if the main point of entrance into the sky world was via the Cygnus constellation, and the fact that it was positioned exactly on the Milky Way, where the Milky Way breaks in two to form two separate streams. This part of the Milky Way is known as the Great Rift, or the Cygnus Rift, and it becomes like a fork. It splits into this fork, and this fork has universally been seen as a point of entry and exit to the sky world, probably since Paleolithic times, maybe 17,000 years, arguably even 30,000 years. So all of these things come together at Göbekli Tepe, and that's the main premise of the book. And you know, it's a complex thing that we're still missing great parts of the jigsaw, but I think we're getting along the right track.
I wanted to talk a little bit about the connection that you made in your book with Genesis and the Garden of Eden, which I think a lot of listeners would be very fascinated to see these connections that you made. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, in 2007, Professor Klaus Schmidt, who sadly died within the last month, who was the German archaeologist that almost single-handedly resurrected Göbekli Tepe in the 1990s by going there and realizing its significance and beginning excavations there, which kept him busy right the way through until this year when he died. In 2007, he linked the Göbekli Tepe complex with the Garden of Eden. I mean, he even sort of threw away the remark that it was almost like a temple in Eden itself. And this is a very interesting statement and a very important one, because this area, as I wrote in books like From the Ashes of Angels, in the middle of the 1990s, is the traditional site of the Garden of Eden. And what I mean by that is that although most people might get the idea that the Garden of Eden or paradise is something which is ethereal or intangible or incorporeal for us, physical mortals, simply because Adam and Eve were thrown out of there, and humanity are not supposed to return. There are lots of clues given in the book of Genesis and in other early texts that tell us quite clearly that it was a physical place, and that it was somewhere in the Near East, and that it says, for instance, that the four rivers of paradise, two of which can be easily identified as the Euphrates and the Tigris, these four rivers were supposed to be the point, where they rise is the point where the Garden of Eden was. And if you look at these four rivers, it takes you into the area of eastern Turkey, just about 100 to maximum 200 miles away from Göbekli Tepe. And in fact, the river Euphrates flows very close to Göbekli Tepe. And this was the traditional Garden of Eden. And I actually even discovered that there was a monastery here in eastern Turkey where the monks believed that their foundation actually was created on some quiet corner of the Garden of Eden, the terrestrial paradise. And they even had a piece of what they believed to be the Tree of Life, which had originated in theory, or certainly been grown from the tree that was within the terrestrial paradise itself, and could bestow immortality upon anything that came into contact with it, whether it be beings, human beings, so to speak, or animals or other plant life or whatever. And they actually had a holy relic that they believed to be, a piece of this tree. Which, obviously as to what exactly they had, we'll never know now, because unfortunately this monastery, which I call the Eden Monastery, but it's actually officially called Yugadat, and it was actually on the northern slopes of the eastern Taurus Mountains, overlooking what's known as the Plain of Mush, M-U-S, which I would say is probably the best candidate by far for the actual, Eden itself as a concept, like a plane. And so, these beliefs were very strong, but you've got to say to yourself, well, okay, we understand about this, but what has any of this got to do with Göbekli Tepe? I mean, Göbekli Tepe was created perhaps 9,500 years before Christianity, and many thousands of years before even the advent of the Semitic or Hebrew religion. So what is the relationship? Well, as I said, the key word here is impact, because shortly after Göbekli Tepe was created, we had what's known as the Neolithic Revolution, and this was the advent of agriculture, the domestication of wheat and rye and barley, for instance, and obviously the earliest animal domestication, pigs, sheep, goats, cattle. All of these animals were domesticated in this region for the first time approximately around 9,000 or just after 9,000 BC. And this meant a complete change of life. People who had been hunter-gatherers before could do what they want. Suddenly, they now were part of communities. There were taskmasters. They had to get up at a certain time of day and go to bed at a certain time of day to get up early again the next day. This was the beginning of a cycle of life which most of us today still are a part of. And I think that this transition from the hunter-gatherer age, what you might call the golden age, if you like, in other words, the period where we were free to do what we wanted, to this hierarchical age where we're generally under the control of others for the most part of our lives, is very much symbolic of the story of Adam and Eve. The idea that Adam and Eve, as the first representatives of humanity, lived this free lifestyle. They didn't have to worry about food, they didn't have to worry about death, they didn't have to worry about hunger or anything. And then suddenly the serpent appears, and this serpent, by the way, is often linked with the Watchers in early Hebrew texts. For instance, in the book of Enoch that talks about the Watchers, it's even said that this serpent was a watcher, and the Watchers are often referred to as like walking serpents, basically, generally because of their appearance, the long faces, viper-like faces and that. But anyway, so the serpent gives Adam and Eve this forbidden fruit. They eat it, and suddenly their innocence is gone, and they realise that they're naked, as if they'd never noticed that they were naked before. And this realization, this loss of innocence, this loss of this purity of life which they had, meant that they could no longer experience the tree of life. The benefits of the tree of life, which was immortality, but even stay within the garden itself. The garden representing the ancient golden age. So they're now thrown out and made to till the land forever. And obviously, what is tilling the land? I mean, it's agriculture. And although we are told, or not we're told, but we believe that the forbidden fruit is something like a nice shiny red apple, that's not what the book of Genesis tells us at all. In fact, it doesn't say what the fruit is. And some old accounts tell us that fruit was in fact wheat. And I think that is a really, really, really important realization, that wheat changed everything. Once the Neolithic Revolution kicked in, our lives were never, ever going to be the same. And I think that This is when everything changed. That's where the loss of innocence was more a case of a loss of freedom. And I'm afraid that, we feel the effects of this even today. Most of us have to get up at a certain time, work, and we have taskmasters, the managers in the office, all the rest of it. Things changed at that point. And that, I think, is the story that's recorded in abstract form within the book of Genesis, in the story of Adam and Eve.
Right. Wow. That's incredible. These connections you found, and of course they're all in your book, are just amazing. It was so fascinating to study up on all of them. Your research obviously challenges the traditional idea of evolution or the traditional idea of civilization as we know it, as we teach it in our schools. What are your thoughts on this, and what do you see your research and the research of other scholars like Graham Hancock? How do you see that playing a role in the future to maybe change our idea of civilization?
Well, it's a slow process, isn't it? I mean,
Right.
the type of material that Graham Hancock or myself write is non-academic. And what I mean by that is that we are not scholars, we're not academics, so we cannot write as, in a way which, could end up in scholarly books. But we write in a scholarly fashion, in fact, sometimes probably even more detail than our academic colleagues. We have to for people to take us seriously. And the ideas that we're putting forward now will go into the collective consciousness and will probably come back at us from the academic books in about 20 years' time, as if they've discovered them themselves. And this is unfortunately always the way that it works. And I mean, I'll give you an example. A gentleman by the name of Stan Goosh, who was a psychologist, wrote a number of books in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, and he died in the 2000s, about Neanderthals, and that they were far more intelligent than what we've ever given credit, and that humanity today is the product of the admixture of Neanderthals and early Homo sapiens, so-called Cro-Magnon man. And people laughed at him. They just thought he was stupid. And everything that he was saying then is now being confirmed by science. DNA evidence is showing us the whole relationship between Neanderthals and Homo sapiens. And also, it's showing that the Neanderthals were incredibly intelligent, and that we should never look at them as anything less intelligent than the human beings that coexisted with them towards the end. And so, that's that. But will he get credit from the academics? Probably not. Will I get credit from the academics? Probably not officially, no. And that's just the way that it is. But if there are not people like myself and Graham Hancock and Robert Schoch and people like that, who obviously is an academic, these ideas will never be put out into the mainstream in the first place. So we play a role, and that's a role which is both personal, one of discovery and exploration, which, we've been, for our sins, we do. And the other, I think, is the dissemination of knowledge and wisdom, which takes much, much longer and is much more frustrating, because sometimes you think that you're knocking your head against a brick wall, that nobody seems to be listening, and then eventually new discoveries are made, and you feel that, yeah, I was on the right track when I wrote that book back in the 1990s. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Therefore,
absolutely.
I feel confident to write, more of the same type of ideas and take it on to the next stage.
Absolutely. Well, please don't stop. From this one person, I'm enjoying your research. It's been incredibly fascinating to connect all these dots. The last thing I want to kind of touch on is you're a speaker at the annual Ancient Mysteries Conference here at the a.r.e, and I know you've been a speaker in the past. What has your experience been like at the Ancient Mysteries Conference, and what do you expect for this upcoming conference?
Well, I mean, my experiences at the a.r.e. are always beautiful. I mean, I really look forward to coming to Virginia Beach. I love the place. I love the centre. I love the people, and I look forward to being there in October. But what's always important when you give lectures there is to show the relationship between what you're saying and the readings of Edgar Cayce. That's almost like the complementary side of the work that you do. And here we have more evidence that Edgar Cayce was correct. Because, he talks about a high culture existing in Egypt around Giza in 10,500 BC. He believed that this was created through the fact that there'd been a cataclysm which had, devastated the world and caused remnants of Atlantis and other types of peoples to come together in Egypt and create this early civilization. But the person who led this civilization was a figure by the name of Rata. And Rata and his people are said to have come in from the area of the Caucasus. And the Caucasus is on the very edge of what we know today as Eastern Turkey. So what he's saying is that the inspiration behind the elder culture of ancient Egypt actually came from the very area that I'm saying that these people came into, the area of Göbekli Tepe, and created civilization. And obviously we know that they wouldn't have stopped there. Once this had flowered, they would have then moved on and ended up in places like Egypt and lower Mesopotamia, and obviously places like the Indus Valley, and of course into Europe itself. So, here we have further evidence that Edgar Cayce was not only right, but is relevant to today.
Right, absolutely. Well, I encourage everybody to go out and get your latest book. It's just filled with tons of connections like the ones you've made today on the show. So I thank you for writing that. As a final question, I just wanted to ask you personally, what's next on your agenda as a researcher?
Well, I mean, obviously, once you do something like this, it's difficult to let go of it. And, your work really is almost a stepping stone away from what you've been working now. And I want to take it back. Göbekli Tepe was 9,500 BC. I want to look very, very closely at the high cultures, maybe even the lost civilization that came to bear on the construction of Göbekli Tepe itself. And I think that the key words for the future, in all honesty, will be human hybrids. I think that's where it's going massively with, skull elongation, the admixtures of different types of people that's coming up with DNA evidence. And that's where I think I'd be going next, to try and understand fully what was taking place as much as 50,000 years ago, possibly even earlier than that. All the different steps that eventually brings us Göbekli Tepe.
Right. Wow. We'll look forward to that. Thank you so much for joining us. It's really been an honor to have you on the show. And please continue to do what you're doing. And we look forward to seeing you here at the a.r.e. at the annual Ancient Mysteries Conference in October. So thank you so much for joining me.
Okay, I look forward to it as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. Andrew Collins is a featured presenter, as we talked about, at the a.r.e.'s annual Ancient Mysteries Conference. And that's in Virginia Beach at the a.r.e. headquarters. And it's from October 9th through the 12th of this year. This year's event is entitled Mystery of Mysteries, Forgotten Worlds, Strange Myths, and Hidden Origins. Andrew is joined by Eric von Daniken, John Anthony West, John Van Auken, Susan B. Martinez, and many, many more speakers. You can get fascinating insights and see vibrant images of lost cultures, hidden histories, and enigmatic places and creatures from across the globe, from ancient Sumeria and Egypt to the stars. You can register for this conference at edgarcayce.org/conferences. Space is limited for the annual Ancient Mysteries Conference, so make sure you register now because it sells out every year. Don't forget to pick up a copy of Andrew's latest book entitled Göbekli Tepe, Genesis of the Gods. You can learn more about Andrew and his work at andrewcollins.com. On behalf of everyone here at the Association for Research and Enlightenment and moretalk.tv, I'm your host, Brenton Bickerstaff, reminding you that we are all searching for the same light, and always remember to support others on their unique path. Thank you for tuning in this week, and have a wonderful week, everybody.